You may be seated, and we're going to have someone come up and do the reading for us this morning.
Before I read the scripture, if you're going to stay and help with the Christmas tree, I could just use some help taking all the tubs out of the elevator that are already there. And there is a calendar on the back table for you to put your birthdays on. And if you put your birthdays on the calendar in the basement, you're covered. So please put your birthdays on the calendar. And we have a Tupperware store in the kitchen. So if you're missing a lot of Tupperware or cookware, bakeware, please come down and check out the Tupperware store. And with that, I will read, and I was always pronounced as Habakkuk.
And I'll talk about that, but you're fine. Go
All
for
right.
it. Yeah.
Okay. The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet received. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so the justice is perverted. The Lord's answer, look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed. For I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like a vulture swooping to devour. They all come bent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They deride kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all fortified cities. They build earthen rams and capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own strength is their God.
Thank you, Lord, for the reading of your word. Well, I'm going to be talking about the very thing about how to pronounce his name, because it is an unusual name. But what version was that, Ms. Mary? Was that NIV? Okay. A lot of the words that they use are very accurate, and we'll be talking about that. Let me pull this away a little bit. That should be better. Yeah, can you turn it down just a tiny bit? I think it's got a little bit of a ring. Well, Habakkuk, that's how I say it. And you say Habakkuk, right? Okay. So I did some research this morning, in fact. I'm thinking, I better just double check that. And I found out that it said both ways. It's very interesting. However, there is one part that is a little bit different, that in the original Hebrew, they don't say it quite like that. They say Habakkuk. So phlegm. And then you say the rest of it. But they say it both ways, so it could be Habakkuk or Habakkuk. So either way is fine. You won't be derided by anybody for that. So that was interesting. Last week I had a question at the very end of the service that said, let's do life together. And the question was, what were you going to do? And the first thing you do when you see Jesus. And so Angel and I talked about it later in the week, and we both had the same response. First thing we're going to do is probably fall down right on his face. And then right afterward, I'll probably cry with joy that I get to be with him. As much as I've enjoyed my life and so forth, there's also been a lot of pain in life, which I'm going to be talking about today. And so to me, when I get to be in heaven, to have that joy and to know that all of the pain of this life are past. And that's one of the first things I want to do when I see him. You'll find in the weeks and months and years to come that I really love history. And I hope that you will too. And yes, kids, you can love history. I know you probably don't like it in school right now, But I really do love history, and so I'm going to mention a couple of times some of that. So I'm going to start off with this first story. A long time ago, there was this man who was desiring to be very powerful and wealthy, and but there were some people who didn't like him. And for the first, probably 10 or 11 years of his political life, he had 11 assassination attempts against him. And then in the last 6 years of his political life, he had 11 more, and one of them almost did kill him. The reason why I bring this up is because if only one of those attempts had worked, we may not have had World War II. The person I'm talking about is Hitler. So we read about the one, and some of you probably watched the movie where they actually tried to, Stauffenberg, I think is his name, von Stauffenberg was trying to kill him, and you hear about that one, but there was actually 22 attempts on his life. One of them was a bomb that was supposed to go off in the air, but it froze. It was so cold. They must have been flying over North Dakota, but it froze in the air, and the bomb didn't go off. And so when they landed, before it unfroze, the guys went in there that had planted the bomb and they dismantled it. Other times it was just by pure chance that he went one way instead of his normal way. And so you kind of wonder, like, God, if you had just allowed one of those to work, we wouldn't have had World War II. But is that true? I don't know. The question is why would God allow such a horrendous war? 40 million people, possibly, perished as a result of that war. It almost seemed that at that time, many Christians were, for those of us who were alive at that time, I was not, although people think I'm that old. The reality is, many of them probably thought that the world is coming to an end. Truly, a world war with so much death and destruction, many people probably thought that Jesus was coming back soon. But Hitler remained alive until the very end. Don't always know the answers. We have some of them now, but it's still hard. But for the next month, we're going to be asking questions of God during frustrating times. Questions that are very hard to ask, but they seem to be questions that all of us ask. So even though this happened 2,500 years ago, Habakkuk had a very big question. And this is a question that we typically ask when life doesn't seem fair to us. And all of us have had that experience in our life. Some of you I've talked to in the last couple of weeks, that life is just not fair. I grew up in a time where it seemed like everybody was kind of open to the gospel, and the country they seemed to care about what was right and wrong. But nowadays, it doesn't seem like our country has a moral compass at all. And it seems like every single day we read the news, it seems like it gets worse. It doesn't seem fair when God takes certain people out of our life as well. Angel never got to meet him, but I did. Keith Green, anybody who's been in the Christian world for a long time, Keith Green was a very famous singer back in the late 70s and early 80s. He sang the song, So You Want to Go Back to Egypt. He was kind of a folksy singer, but he was also a man passionate for the things of God. And he was starting a new thing in his life where he was trying to get people to become missionaries all over the world. It was through his ministry that my sister, my best friend, and I all became missionaries because of Keith Green. So I saw him in June of 2000, I think it was 82, 81 or 82. It must have been 82.
1982.
Huh? 1982. Yeah, not 1882, Angel.
I said 1982. You said 2082.
So in 1982, I saw Keith Green. The very next month, he and a couple of his children perished in an airplane accident. And I was asking the question, God, why would all people would you take Keith Green? He's doing such a great work. Why would you take someone like him? He was only in his 30s, I think. He was maybe late 30s. I'm thinking, Lord, why would you take him? But the same is true of all of us. There have been people in our lives that we've lost, haven't there? Young, old, and we wonder, why in the world did you take him? So let's talk about Habakkuk. And I'm going to call him the whining prophet, because why? I'm trying to make a funny thing. I heard a couple of giggles because you laughed at my joke. The whining prophet, because he asks lots of questions, but it seems like he's always whining. You know, he's always like, God, please, what, really, seriously? And you'll see that as we go through this. He was probably the last prophet in Judah before they went into captivity. Now, here's what's interesting, though, about Habakkuk. They went into captivity around 586 BC, and he probably wrote this book around 600, so about 14 years before they went into captivity. But he was living in a time where the king that was ruling was a really bad guy. But Habakkuk was old enough to remember Josiah, truly the last great king of Judah. So he's probably thinking, man, God, look at the good old days of Josiah. Can't we go back to that? Haven't we all said that ourselves? Oh, the good old days. Now, some of you have recognized that the good old days weren't so nice. Miss Edna brought that up to us a few weeks ago when she talked about the good old days, and the kids are saying, would you like to do this? And the kids are going, no, that doesn't sound like a good old day. But for him, he was kind of pining back to that time and saying, Lord, why couldn't we go back to that? Now, at the same time, the Chaldeans, who we're going to learn a bit more in a little bit here, they were growing in power. The question was, Lord, why are we going through this? Why is our nation becoming so wicked? It was only just a few years ago. We're talking maybe 20, 30 years before, things were good. The nation was in good shape. And all it took was 20 years, and the nation was going downhill. Who would have thought in our lifetime that we'd see the United States where it is today? Who would think that we would have the troubles we're having, even in the church world, where we're dealing with this whole issue with the transgender and homosexuals? Why? That had never been brought up before. And all of a sudden it seems to be permeating even in the church. And so the very first verse there, it says, the burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. So this idea of burden, this problem that he's talking about, is the idea of something that's heavy, that's weighing upon him. You've all had that in your life. There's something that happens and it just feels like there's this giant weight on your shoulders, doesn't it? And it just feels like you can't get anything done. We often say that God works in mysterious ways. But what are we truly saying? Are we truly saying that God does and we're okay with that? Because in this instance, Habakkuk is not okay with it. He's wondering, why is stuff going the way it is? He saw this as a deep burden, and he was thinking, Lord, do you even care what's going on? Because this is what he saw. He saw violence, idolatry, oppression, destruction. He's crying out to God. In the Hebrew, it's a very strong word that he's using. He's crying out to God. He thinks that somehow God doesn't care, that he's indifferent. Maybe he's deaf like the other gods are. He's wondering, God, do you really care? And that's our question for today. God, do you care about what's going on? Habakkuk was concerned about God's people. He was concerned about what was going on. He really cared, but it seemed like nothing was happening. And this is a true cry of help. He saw nothing but strife around him and impending doom. Even his own people that he loved and cared for, seemed to be at odds with each other and with God. Now, we don't know that much about Habakkuk. He's not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. Usually a lot of the books will tell you, Habakkuk, son of so-and-so, it's nothing. So it's like Habakkuk is just like the normal man. And maybe that's for a reason. It's just like for all of us. Because we're normal people, we have the struggles, and we wonder why things are happening the way they are. And here's the thing. I was talking with someone this past week, and this individual was almost to the point of, it's not right to question why God does certain things. We know God's in control. We know that's true. But it doesn't mean that we can't question why God's doing what he's doing. He's a pretty big God. He's not afraid of us raising some issues with him. He's not hurt by if we question him. He's God. He knows everything. He's in control. And really, if you think about it, if we raise these issues, it means we care about them. If we're concerned about our nation and our church, and we're saying, God, why is the church going this way? Why is our country going down this road? It shows that we do care about it. And if we don't even question that, maybe we should be concerned about our own moral compass. Now, there are 4 words that he uses here in verses 2 and 3. He says, "Oh Lord, how long will I cry out? Will you not hear? Even when I cry out to you, violence." Violence is a really big word there. It's a very strong word. It talks about malicious conduct, and that means people purposely going out and causing violence to one another. And we see that every day in the news, don't we? They want to go out and purposely injure people. The next one, he says, "And you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity?" Why is all this iniquity? Why is there all this evil? You know, I was in law enforcement for a number of years, and I saw some pretty nasty stuff. And then when I would talk to some of those people, it was like it was no big deal. Like, it's no big deal. Or, I should be able to do what I want. They would even justify very wicked acts by saying, I can do what I want. Why shouldn't I be able to do that? After a while, I became a little bit dull to some of that. You know, and Andy, I'm sure you've seen that as well, is that if you don't allow it to cause a little dullness in your life, you might be just so overwhelmed by it. I don't know how you could survive. I mean, we hear police officers all the time who are going through PTSD because of all the trauma and the stuff that they go through. And so, you know, Andy and I have talked many times about the different things, and even though this is a small town, there's still things that he had to go and do a bomb inspection at our hospital just a couple weeks ago. I mean, this is Mission, North Dakota. But we had a bomb threat at our hospital. The next word he uses talks about, again, the idea of iniquity, and then the third word is oppression or trouble. This describes someone who works at being wicked. It's not like they're just being an okay person. This is someone who purposely goes out and does deeds of darkness. And the last word is destruction, because all of those deeds of darkness leads to destruction. When we do certain things, it leads to destruction. If you go out and murder someone, chances are you're going to be a violent person, and therefore other people can be violent towards you. It brings destruction. So this idea of all these words, the idea of violence and destruction, is to show that Judah is morally bankrupt. He's basically saying, there's no one good out there. There's no way of turning this nation around. We've got to the point of no return. Doesn't it kind of seem that way here in America? You kind of think, Lord, I don't know how you could possibly turn this nation around. How can you possibly turn the church around? It seems like we're going down this road to destruction and there's no redemption whatsoever. Now remember, this is Habakkuk speaking about Judah. He's using these words to describe Judah. Apparently God agrees with him, as we will see in verse 5. Now the world looks at it like this. This is Bob. Who knows Bob Dylan? A few of us older folk knows about Bob Dylan. Famous singer, folk singer back in the 60s and 70s. And did anybody recognize this song? Yep. So he sang, this is one of the verses to one of his songs, and it was in rebellion against the war in Vietnam. And so let's read it. It says, "How many times does a man look up before he can see the sky? Yes, how many ears does one man have before he can hear the people cry? Yes, and how many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died?" The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. So he didn't have an answer, did he? He said, it's just blowing in the wind. What are we going to do? There was no answer. He had no answer for them. Habakkuk feels powerless as well. Now, maybe if he was king, like we talked about last few weeks, he could right all those wrongs. He could be the Josiah and be a good king. And again, maybe our response would be the same. Like, Lord, if I was in charge, I could fix things. Right? Am I the only one that feels that if I was in charge, I could fix everything? Okay. Angel, we need to have a talk later on. I guess I need some counseling. This idea that the law has grown cold. To the point it says the law, Marianne, in your reading, it says the law has gone cold or paralyzed. That's actually the better translation than in my own version. Before the law is powerless, the idea that it's paralyzed, it's unable to do anything. It may want to, but it cannot. It's frozen. And And that's the idea that's been frozen here. And then the idea that, and then the wicked surround the righteous, almost like this being engulfed or overwhelmed. So the righteous are just, they have no power, they feel powerless, they're all wondering what to do, kind of like sometimes where we are in our life. Now, I want to bring up something that's very interesting. Maybe you hadn't thought about this before. John the Baptist, we know, was the cousin to Jesus. We learned that through the Christmas story. I think the kids did it at the play. They talked about Elizabeth being the cousin to Mary. And so we know that John the Baptist and Jesus are related. So my question is, they're related, they're kinfolk. Why did Jesus allow John to be arrested, punished in jail, and then beheaded? Isn't he God? Why would he allow his cousin to go through all that? You know, sometimes we say that in our own life. Lord, why would you do that in my life? Why would you allow my cousin, my nephew, my aunt, my mom, my grandma, why would you allow them to go through all that? When in his own life, John the Baptist, his own cousin, he did not spare from the evil of this world. Evil surrounds us, and it brings harm to us. We don't always know the answer. We do know he's in charge. We're going to talk about that next week. But here it also says, it's implied in here, that the rich have become richer, just like in America. 1% of the population owns like 50% of all wealth in America and in the world. Justice is perverted, the poor suffer. It sounds like today. I'll never forget when Angel and I were in the Philippines. They don't hide corruption. In America, we try to do a better job of hiding corruption. But in the Philippines, it's like wide open. We took taxis, what's called jeepneys, everywhere in the city of Manila when we traveled through there. And we'd be driving through, and all of a sudden, I'd see a cop standing out in the middle of the road. And he'd do this. And he would point at a jeepney, and they'd pull over. They'd get 3 or 4 in a row. And then he'd go along, and I should have brought a little example, but he'd go along, and every taxi driver, jeepney driver, has a little, like, small billfold, almost like a business card holder. On the one side is his license. On the other side is a 10 peso note. So the cop will come up to the first one, he'll open it up, and he'll look at the name, and he'll just go like this, and close it back up, thank you very much. And he goes through and does all 4 or 5 cars. Well, that could really boost your income, wouldn't it, Andy? And that's how these cops would do it. They would just go along and they would pull out, they wouldn't write them a ticket, they would act like they're doing something, and then they would, take a little in the pocket that goes. I mean, these guys were pulling in as much as their salary a month just by pulling over people and he stood in the middle of the highway. They're going by 40, 50 kilometers per hour, and he just goes like this, and they know what to do. They just pull over and they get their billfold off. They're probably checking to make sure the 10 peso note is on the one side because they got pulled over 2 or 3 miles before. But the point is that they did that, and the corruption was so bad. You're thinking, why doesn't anybody do anything about that? It's open. Everyone sees what they're doing. Why doesn't anybody do anything about it? But no one does. It just keeps on going. So God, he does answer. The first thing he does is he says, look around you. It's kind of interesting because it's almost like he's kind of picking at Habakkuk a little bit. Because if you remember, Habakkuk raised the question, God, don't you see what's going on? It's horrible. And he says, hey, look. No, buddy, you look. You look to see what I'm doing. I am going to answer you, and this is how I'm going to do it. I am going to be the one that's going to take care of this. The reality is God's already at work. God's already doing it. We just didn't know it, and neither did Habakkuk. He wasn't looking at it. God does answer those tough questions. Not always the way in which we'd like, but he does do it. You know, in the book of Romans, Paul says to Israel that they would be rejected. In chapter 9. And eventually Rome would be the people that would go and destroy Jerusalem and move all the people out of there. May not have been an answer they were wanting to hear, but that's what the result was. In verse 6, it says, For indeed I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and nasty nation which marches through the breadth of the earth to possess dwelling places that are not theirs. God says he's going to deal with the evil by sending a foreign nation to take care of it. I'm thinking, God, you're going to use evil people to punish the good people? I don't understand that. It doesn't make sense. Why would you do it that way? Why would you bring someone more evil? It was like he was actually sending these Chaldeans to be like sheep, to be like wolves among the sheep. He was actually doing that. That's what he felt like. And in fact, in that verse, it talks about what he does there. The Chaldeans were rising up to power. In 605 BC, right about the time that he's writing this book, there's a giant battle in Carchemish. That battle is most of you guys have probably never even heard that battle. But it's one of the most important battles in the Old Testament. Because Babylon rose to power, Assyria fell, never to be heard from again. We never hear about the Assyrians after this. And Egypt was also involved. They lost that war, and Egypt was never a strong power ever again. These Chaldeans were a mean, violent people. In verse 7, it says, they are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity proceed from themselves. The justice and authority originates from them. They think that they have all the power. They're a law unto themselves. They were violent, they laughed at their enemies, and they conquered many, many kings, as I just mentioned. In verse 8 it says, their horses are swifter than leopards, more fierce than evening wolves. Their chargers charge ahead. Their cavalry comes from afar. They fly as an eagle that hastens to eat. Such violent terms. I mean, they're not going to come and just say, hey, we're going to take over and rule your government. No, we're going to come in and we're going to utterly destroy you. We're going to just completely destroy you. And in verse 9 it says, they all come for violence. Their faces are set like the east wind. They gather captives like sand. What they did was they would come into a land and they would take the people captive, and then they would move them to another place in their kingdom. Completely remove them from their land. That's how they kept people under control. Because then there was they had no power, they had no wealth, they had to reestablish themselves. Think about it, when the German Russians came here 100-something years ago, they came here with basically nothing. I've heard the stories where they came here and they had almost nothing. And it took them years to get to the point where they were able to be more than just subsistence farmers. And that's how the Chaldeans did it. That's how they did the same thing. They just removed people. And it appeared in verse 10 that nothing could stop the Chaldeans. Nothing could stop these evil people. They were a law unto themselves, and they could not be stopped. Talk about getting out of the pan and into the fire. And this is the question I ask, think about Habakkuk. Habakkuk, be careful what you pray for. He was praying, Lord, aren't you going to do something about it? And the Lord says, yes, I am. I'm bringing Chaldeans. What? Are you kidding me? Well, the worst thing of all of this is the Chaldeans never gave God any credit for what he was doing. They said, we're our own God. We're so powerful, nobody can take over. So who are these people? These Chaldeans, they're violent. They're idolatrous. They're oppressive. They bring destruction. Doesn't that sound like what Israel was? There were those four things, weren't they? They were violent. Remember the first word that Habakkuk says? Violence! There's violence in the land. They're idolatrous. They're following other ways. Oppressive, destructive, purposefully. It's interesting that God would use an ungodly people to do that. So the question I say is, seriously, aren't you making the problem worse? Well, we're going to answer that question next week, just to kind of keep you interested and maybe want to come back for next week. My question is, how can an invading army make things better? You see, they're just going to get worse. To me, it does not make any sense. Why would God do this? Why would God bring in another people? And they seem to be more violent than Israel themselves. So what do we do? How do we answer? Well, still frustrated by the answer. Still frustrated by the situations in life. There's evil all around us. Sin abounds in our world. And it seems like at times there's nothing we can do about it. As much as we like to work at it, we can't do it. But we do know that God knows what we're going through. There is injustice, there is unfairness in the world, there is violence, but God knows it. Didn't he see what was happening to his cousin? He knew what was going to happen to John the Baptist. And he didn't do anything about it in our eyes. Wasn't he, and think about this, wasn't he wrongly accused and crucified? He should not have been, should he? He was guilty of nothing. And yet, because of sin, he died a death that only he could die. Somehow, he uses wicked to accomplish his will. I had a roommate in college. We got together, and after the first semester in college, I couldn't stand being in the dorm. There was too much noise, and it was just a bunch of frat boys and football players, and they're so noisy. So my roommate and I decided to get another apartment off campus. Come to find out, he was a very wicked and evil person. One day he actually said to me, "Brian, one day when you get wealthy, I'm going to come and I'm going to kill you and take all of your wealth." Nice guy, huh? Yeah, real nice guy. But I continued to live there for about a year with him. And I had become a Christian in the meantime. And one day I was going through all of my records. Some of them were not good records. So I was throwing some of those records away and keeping the good ones and throwing away the bad ones. And I didn't have a lot of money. I was a college student. You know, everybody who's been in college knows that. You know, living on top ramen and grape juice was my daily meal. But I was just going through this, being obedient to the God by getting things out of my life that are not good for me. But I had been praying, Lord, I could really use a small little Bible so when I'm at work, I can just pull it out of my pocket and read when I'm in between. I was a security guard when I'm in between walk. And because it was too hard to carry my Bible around, I had a motorcycle and it was really hard to carry it around. I just asked him, Lord, can I have a little Bible? So I'm sitting on the floor with these records in front of me, and my roommate comes in. And it's just like he was just walking, he just walked through. He didn't even stop. He was just walking through, and he just went like this, and he had something in his hand. He goes, "Oh, I was at the college today, and someone gave me this, so I thought you could use it." Went like that, and he walked right into his room. And this thing flutters over and lands right in my lap. I pick it up. It's a Gideon Bible. He used, and I tell you what, my eyes got about that big around. My God, you used a wicked person to bring me something. You're amazing. I was like, how in the world did you do that? I mean, he was totally against my Christianity. He hated my guts. He made it a threat against my life. But yet someone gives him this little Bible, and he realizes that I need it, and he gives it to me. You can't tell me that God's not in control. You see, God does love us, and he will reward us. It doesn't mean, though, that life isn't still hard. Life is hard. I'd be lying to you if that was not the case. The trees which are pruned, watered, and nurtured by caring hands bear the greatest fruits, and it is the same with people. Sometimes we go through some pruning. So what is our response? So these are the four things that we are in our mission statement, is that this is how we respond to our world. We go, we love, we disciple, and we worship. So the first question that Habakkuk asks, the response that we should have is, we are to go. God cares about his creation. He cares about all of us. And even though life is tough, he still tells us to go because we do have an answer for the world. We go because he cares. So, in us, for our life, we need to go out and tell people that God does know. He knows what you're going through. He went through it himself. He does love us. And he will reward us later in life. He will reward righteousness. And so this week, here's a question I'd like you to ask. In fact, the kids, they're going to have their lesson based on our message. So each week, after I write the message, I then put together the children's message. And the Sunday school will be based on our message today. And this is the same question that they're going to have, so they'll have the question as well. And you can talk about it as a family. So something for home is, what are ways God shows He cares for us? Especially right after this season of Christmas, I think it'd be a good question to ask as a family. What are some good ways in which God does this? How does He care for you? Be thinking about that. And when you get home, share that with your wife, your family, your kids, so they do see that God does love them and He does care about them. Father, we just thank you so much. We have lots of questions. Sometimes these questions make us really, really mad. There are times in my life I've asked, Lord, why would you do this? I've been faithful to you, and yet still so much pain. And I know that everybody in this room can say the same thing, that they love you with all of their heart, and yet it seems like at times that you don't care about us. We're so grateful for your word, where you remind us that you are already working on it. You're already caring and taking care of us. It may not be what we like. We may not agree with how you're doing it, but we know that you love us. And that one day we will receive your reward. And we so look forward to that day. Give you all the glory and praise. Amen.